of benefits to working collaboratively and working in groups. So now I kind of want to move from the benefits of working in groups. So we've talked about tribes, what tribes is. We've talked about the tribes agreements and how those guide the way that we work and play together. We've talked about the benefits of working collaboratively. And so now I want to talk a little bit about the tools that we have created here at BSI to help students to self-manage. So this is about social and emotional learning, and so sometimes feelings are strong. Students have conflict, and that comes up, and so we've learned to teach them about I messages and to be able to talk about how they're feeling and what they need. Okay, so I'm going to actually go to the next slide. Because we are really trying to foster independence and really teach students to be empowered. And so some of the tools that we have in place are the IMAT, and many of you may have seen it, but I brought a little sample. And by the time kids get to 3rd and 4th grade, they have the language, so they may not necessarily see this, but you'll see it in the hallway. And on one side, you'll see ears, and I think it's just a beautiful illustration of speaking and listening, right? If you think about the Common Core standards, speaking and listening are big, and this is just a great way to get kids to practice speaking and listening and paraphrasing what they heard. So on this side, you have a smiley face, and this is the person that is speaking, and on the other side, this is the person that is listening. There are words that kind of prompt them, so they'll start with I feel, right? Because a lot of our actions are motivated by our feelings, right? So if you can identify the feeling first, then you're able to articulate what you need from that person. So I feel, maybe I feel sad. I need, maybe I need, my friends to share or include me. And then you make a request. You get to this blue part and you make a request from your partner. And with each step, they're standing in the same place. So this person speaks about how they feel, and this person paraphrases. So Sarah, you feel sad. So just to clarify, so they're clarifying for understanding, and then he or she can state what they need, and then so I can say, Sarah, you need, and then they'll get to the blue, and then you'll ask them, make a request. Well, Sarah, will you share with me? Will you take turns? Whatever the request is, and then this is a place where they can appreciate each other for listening. Thank you for listening. And sometimes students switch, because there's always two sides to every story, but it gives everyone an opportunity to be seen and heard. Okay, so this is a wonderful tool, and once we teach into it, students are able to either do it in the classroom or in the hallway on their own. And as the kids get older, they just have the language, and so sometimes I will sit just at a table and students will talk to each other, but they sort of have a formula, right, to guide their conversation. So that's one tool. The other thing I wanted to speak about, there were several teachers, and this is not really a part of Tribe, but last year we did this? A few years ago, we did a peace inquiry group where we noticed that students, they have feelings and emotions, and sometimes it's, as we saw in the research, right? Like there's imbalance when you're mad or you're sad or you're, lonely. There's imbalance, and it's hard for you to think. And so we as teachers said, how can we create a space where students can, kind of get in touch with those feelings and then be able to come back to the group. And so we created a peace center, and we started with ourselves, like what creates peace for us? Being in nature, like I think about being in nature for myself, or going for a walk, or just doodling or drawing. And so from that inquiry group, we were able to create peace centers in classrooms, and the children take it on, and they decorate corners. I don't have pictures, but I just know in my own room I have a peace box, and there's stuffed animals, there's peace books, there's flowers, I have shells, markers, stuffed animals, and so again, it's just a place for a student to go to get that balance back, right? So peace centers. And I wanted to then talk a little bit about think time. Some of you may have seen think time sheets. It's kind of like this, and you see a little person, and they're like thinking about what happened. So it's just two simple statements, let's see. What did I do? What can I do differently? And it changes from grade to grade, but the point of this is it's really sometimes, as we go back to the feelings, when anyone is having strong feelings, it's hard to have a conversation, right? So as a teacher, if a student comes and they're really upset, they're crying, they're angry, they're frustrated, that there's an imbalance. So we use this as a place to depart from. And so that student may go and sit and write about what happened and then what could be done differently. And then when the person is calm, we can use this as a tool to help facilitate that conversation. We might find we need to get other students to come and talk, or maybe this student needs a particular tool because they're feeling frustrated. So this is a wonderful tool that we use to help students to sort of put down their thoughts and feelings, and then we use it as a way to facilitate conversation. So that's that. There was a big time. And so that leads me then to responsive classroom. So I want you, when I want you to think about in terms of tribes, it's sort of like the what, right? It's our values. It's the way that we work and play together. Yeah, it's the what. And so Sarah's going to talk more concretely about the how with responsive classroom. Okay. So that's.
So how many of you have actually heard the term responsive classroom? And how many of you feel very familiar with it? Okay, so I'll stay. So the three principles of responsive classroom are belonging, significance, and fun. Belonging, we all want to belong to a group. It really doesn't feel good when you are in the circle and you feel like you don't belong. Whether you're new, whether you're old, whether it's the same old thing, or whatever it is that's making you feel like you're not a part of this circle, that's what we want to get rid of. Significance, so like not only do you want to belong, but you want to be heard and respected and have people actually listen to you and understand you. So we want to encourage our kids to really listen to each other and repeat back what each other says, even if it takes 10 times to repeat back what one person said. If the object that day was that we're all going to listen to each other, really, then that's a worthy goal because it gives people significance in the circle. And fun, because we're kids, and even if we weren't kids, we would still need to have fun. And fun just makes everything easier. It makes the learning easier. It makes people more willing to learn and less likely to shut down. So fun is extremely important. Next slide, please. So there are some proactive teaching methods that we use in responsive classroom, and the first is interactive modeling. And one of the principles in a responsive classroom is you never assume that students know how to do anything, no matter how old they are. You don't assume that they know how to walk through the door. You don't assume that they know how to sit quietly. You don't assume that they know where the pencils are. At the beginning of the year, in the first 6 weeks of school, we model every little thing so that there is no confusion. And so that it's less about, oh, you did that wrong. It's more about, okay, well, I can see that we need practice. So let's all practice what it looks like and feels like to come to the rug. Or let's all practice what it looks like and feels like to line up. Because that wasn't quite it. So the first 6 weeks of school, it's a lot of practicing, a lot of modeling, and a lot of leaving assumptions behind that they should know this by now. After the first 6 weeks, they should know it. But during the first 6 weeks, we leave it open for learning. Teacher language, reinforcing, reminding, and redirecting. So rather than immediately going to a redirecting stance, we first try to reinforce the positive behaviors we see. And say, I noticed that most of us are sitting quietly, looking forward, ready to go. As opposed to, you need to sit up and face forward and get ready. So we reinforce the positive a lot. And reminding, so this is kind of like your first try. I'd like to remind you that we're not using cell phones while I'm talking today. Okay? That's just a reminder. Redirecting would be put your cell phone away. Okay? But we remind before we redirect in order to save face, in order to assume the best in our students, that we all forget, we all make slide, please. Okay, so morning meeting is the structure that we use in order to keep things fun. We start with a morning message that's quite often related to the academics of the day, and sometimes it's not. Sometimes it's related to something social, emotional that's happening. After the morning message, the students will all come up and sign it. They come straight to the circle and they greet each other. And the principle is that by looking in somebody's eyes and saying their name and saying good morning, something happens there. You actually create a connection, you build more community. And without greeting each other, we can get lost in our own little world. So this brings everybody into the room and grounds us. Then we have a share. And share could be anything from everyone around the circle gets to share their favorite ice cream or their favorite season or something that happened this weekend to, maybe one or two people have a really significant story to share and everyone listens. And when that person is done sharing, they say, I'm ready for questions and comments. And that's when we teach into what is a respectful question, what is a respectful comment. And we work on that all year long until the students are just doing it on their own. And students have shared some pretty powerful stuff by the end of the year, but it takes a lot of kind of shallow sharing to get really into the deep stuff by like February. It gets really deep. After the share is an activity or a game, and that is just a way to kind of have fun before we launch into our big day of learning. Next slide, please. So one of the other principles of responsive classroom is that we create the rules together. And the rules are based on our hopes and dreams. The reason we need rules is so that we can achieve our hopes and dreams without getting in our own way or in the way of other people. So after the students figure out what their hopes and dreams are, they think about three things. What's a rule that we need to take care of ourselves? What's a rule that we need to take care of other people? And what's a rule that we need to take care of our space? And they work in teams and they brainstorm possible rules, and then democratically they vote on it, and they get 3 rules for the classroom for the entire year. And these rules are constantly reinforced. Next slide, please. So there has to be follow-up if the rules are not followed. And in responsive classroom, they don't believe in punishments. Instead, it's called logical consequences. And the reason it makes sense is because it's actually related to whatever the student did. So if the student dropped something and everything fell all over the place, then the consequence is to pick it all up. If what the student did was say something mean to a friend, then the consequence has to be related to that. So it might be something like, I'm going to help that friend for the rest of the day. Or I'm going to think of 3 nice things that I can say about that person and constantly remind them how I appreciate them. The consequences are consistent in the sense that they're always related to whatever happened, and they're always reasonable, and they're always respectful of the students. But they're inconsistent in the sense that they're unique to each situation. So what might be a logical consequence for me might not be a logical consequence for Toy, and these are negotiated with students and teachers together, coming up with what makes sense. And it's about making reparations, and it's about owning up and taking responsibility. So, apology of action is probably my favorite thing that I learned in responsive classroom. And that means that it's not enough to say, I'm sorry. Because if you're sorry, that doesn't really change anything. So rather than saying I'm sorry 10 times after I hurt your feelings, the next day I might bring you something or do something for you, or do one of those random acts of kindness that actually really makes you feel good, rather than just knowing that I'm sorry. And so we call this apology of action, and it's about truly correcting the behavior as opposed to just being sorry about the behavior. And finally, take a break. So Toy talked earlier about the Peace Corner, which is a way for students to go somewhere when they need a break. And it's up to them to decide when they need a break. And there's a timer, and it's a way for them to self-regulate their own strong emotions. Take a break is different. Take a break is when the student doesn't notice that he or she needs a break, and the teacher notices it. But this has to happen right away. It's not once things have escalated. It's like the first sign of this could be a problem, like somebody's whispering, okay, you could take a break. It's not a punishment. It's let's take a break before things get out of hand and suddenly things escalate. I've noticed, at least in the upper grades, really appreciate, and it makes them feel like they have a minute to kind of get their thoughts together and come back and focus and never have to get in trouble. Next slide, please. So the outcomes that have been proven by lots and lots of research of responsive classroom. It increases social skills and academic engagement because when we have a calm, respectful community, it is much easier to learn in a group. Establishes positive classroom climate, increases learner investment and independence. It really increases independence. Students know where everything is, they know what the rules are, and they can relax. Because when you don't know where the boundaries are, you don't know how far you can go. But when they know, it's much easier and much safer. And decreases disruptive behavior because there's all these ways to fix mistakes and nobody's perfect and we're a community and we're working together to make sure that we're all learning how to be at our best.